On our hangout, we have Professor Morris, who's our MRC Flagship Award winner, to speak on the possibility of an HIV vaccine in South Africa. Welcome, Professor.
Good afternoon.
What would be the core function of this HIV vaccine?
So, vaccines are designed to prevent infections. And, we have vaccines against many viral diseases that have been extremely effective. And so there's many people that think, I think everybody thinks that a vaccine against HIV is really what we need to curtail this epidemic.
And Doctor, now that the clinical trials are over, what has been the outcome?
Well, so the clinical trials are very much ongoing. We've had one signal in one clinical trial. There was a trial that was done in Thailand a couple of years ago, and that gave a bit of a hint that we're on the right path. And so the trials that are now being designed are to both replicate that result, but of course to make it better, because the vaccine was only partially effective, and of course we want a vaccine that's highly protective.
And Professor, for a vaccine to be approved, it needs to cure 90% of the people. Do you think for something like HIV that same criteria should be used?
Well, so that is a debate about, at what point should a vaccine, what efficacy should it have? And just to point out, vaccines are there to prevent infection, not cure infection. So, even if we had a vaccine that prevented 50% of infections, it would still have a major impact on this epidemic. So we may not need the high bar that we perhaps apply to other infectious diseases, mainly because HIV is so prevalent and is such a serious problem.
And this vaccine would only be preventing people from not getting infected. What about the people that are already infected? Is there any research that's currently being done for that side?
Right. So there's lots of research on a cure. So for people who are already infected, of course, there are very good antiretroviral treatments that manage to control the virus in people's bodies. So people basically have no symptoms, and they're sort of keeping the virus in check. But of course, they still have the virus in their body. And so there's a lot of research on trying to develop new generation of drugs that purge the virus from people's bodies, a so-called cure. And yes, it's a very active area of research.
So how is this vaccine going to help out in the possibility of finding a cure for HIV?
So, yeah, I guess they're two different things, really. The one is to prevent infection in HIV-negative people, and the other, of course, is for people already infected. But I should say there are, people are also looking at therapeutic vaccines. So those are vaccines that would be given to infected people with the intention to try and stimulate immunity, not necessarily to clear the virus, but to really keep the virus in check. So those two things are kind of targeting two different groups.
And just take me through how this vaccine would work. What does it do to the body?
Yes, so the way vaccines work is that they stimulate natural immunity. They stimulate our immune system to fight infections. And most vaccines work by stimulating antibody responses and also some what are called cellular responses. So those are the soldiers in the body. And an HIV vaccine is also being designed to do that same thing, to really stimulate the antibody and the cells in the body to fight off HIV.
And Professor, like a lot of attempts have been done to prevent the spread of HIV, one of them being the whole vaginal gel, which was meant to prevent you from getting infected. How is this vaccine research that you're working on different, and how is it going to create more hope for people who are infected and those that hope not to be infected by HIV?
So yes, so there's been a lot of progress in terms of using antiretrovirals for prevention. As of course, antiretrovirals were developed to treat people who are already infected. But in actual fact, one of the major successes in the prevention field in the last couple of years has been the ability to use the same drugs in HIV-negative people to prevent them from getting infected. And they're used in different forms. Some of them are used orally, and some are used locally. So the microbicide gel, or the vaginal gel, is a gel that contains antiretroviral drugs, and that is deposited in the vagina before and after sex, and is able to prevent the virus from gaining entry into the body. And so yes, there have been a lot of very exciting developments of using drugs for HIV prevention. But the feeling is that the problem with using something like drugs is that people have to take them all the time. And we know that that is problematic. We know that from, from antibiotic use, even anti-malarials, people have lives and they forget about these sorts of routines. And that's why a vaccine is so important, because vaccines are long-lasting. People do not have to take a vaccine every day. And so that's really why the use of drugs is certainly very important in the interim while we develop a vaccine for HIV.
And when can people expect the HIV vaccine on the market in the country?
Yeah, so that's a very tough question to answer, because to be honest, we don't know. All I can say is that we certainly have a strong signal that we're on the right path, and there's a very set, phased process of testing different vaccines. There's very strict regulatory rules about how one goes about testing experimental vaccines in humans, and these are a long process. So certainly it's going to be many, many years, and that's why the fact that we have antiretrovirals as well that can be used to prevent infection is really important, because we do need to control this epidemic in the interim.
Thank you so much, Professor.
That's a pleasure.